The thunder of hooves echoed through the dusty streets of Dillon, Montana, as Florence Lawson gripped her father's pocket watch tightly, the only thing she had left of him besides the deeds to his store. The year was 1885, and at 22, Florence found herself alone in a town that viewed single women as either pitiable creatures or suspicious anomalies. Her father's death 3 months prior had thrust her into a world she wasn't prepared for, running his general store alone while fending off both predatory suitors and hostile competitors. "Miss Lawson." "Your delivery's here," called Samuel, the delivery boy from the railroad depot, as he pulled his wagon to a stop in front of Lawson's General Goods. Florence tucked the watch back into her apron pocket and hurried outside. "Thank you, Samuel. Let me help you unload." "That ain't proper, Miss Florence," Samuel protested, though at 14 he was struggling with the heavier crates. "Proper won't keep this store running," Florence replied, rolling up her sleeves. She'd learned that lesson quickly after her father's passing. As they unloaded, Florence noticed Walter Morganson and his cronies watching from across the street. Morganson owned the competing general store, and he'd made no secret of his desire to drive her out of business or into a marriage of convenience where he'd gain her property. "Lawson girls still playing shopkeeper," Morganson called loudly enough for the entire street to hear. "How long you think before she admits a woman can't run a business on her own?" Florence ignored him, focusing on checking the inventory against her order list. 3 months of such comments had thickened her skin, though they still stung. "My pa says it ain't natural, a woman without a husband trying to manage affairs," Samuel whispered, repeating what he'd clearly overheard at home. "Your pa is entitled to his opinion," Florence said evenly, "but my father taught me every aspect of this business since I was 12. I intend to honor his legacy." After paying Samuel and sending him on his way, Florence retreated into the cool interior of the store. The familiar scent of leather, coffee beans, and cotton goods comforted her as she began shelving the new inventory. The store had been her home for as long as she could remember, and she refused to surrender it without a fight. The bell above the door jingled, and Florence turned to find Mrs. Barton, the banker's wife, standing there with her 2 daughters. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Barton," Florence greeted with a practiced smile. The woman barely nodded in acknowledgement. "Girls, look at what you want, but be quick about it." Then, turning to Florence, "We're hosting the spring social next Saturday. I trust you'll be supplying the usual goods. Of course, I'll have everything delivered on Friday." Mrs. Barton sniffed. "See that you do. Your father was always reliable with these matters." "I do hope you can maintain his standards." Florence felt her smile stiffen. "The quality of our goods and service remains unchanged, Mrs. Barton. Indeed." The woman's eyes traveled over Florence's simple work dress and loose hair, which had escaped its pins during the unloading. "Though some changes might be advisable. A woman alone invites talk, you know. Mr. Morganson is a widower of good standing. He's mentioned interest. Mr. Morganson is interested in my store, not me," Florence interrupted, then immediately regretted her bluntness as Mrs. Barton's eyes narrowed. "Pride doesn't become you, Miss Lawson. A woman needs protection in this world." Florence bit her tongue. Mrs. Barton's husband controlled the loans that kept many businesses in Dillon afloat. Antagonizing her wouldn't serve any purpose. After the Bartons departed with their purchases, Florence locked the store for her midday meal break. She lived in the apartment above the shop, but today she needed fresh air and perspective. Taking her packed lunch, she walked to the small park near the courthouse where she often ate alone. As she settled on a bench, Florence noticed a commotion at the sheriff's office across the street. A man she'd never seen before was dismounting a magnificent chestnut horse. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard work and open spaces. His dark cowboy hat shaded his face, but she could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in the dust of the trail. The stranger spoke briefly with Sheriff Patterson before the lawman clapped him on the shoulder with unusual familiarity. Florence's curiosity was piqued. Dillon didn't receive many visitors who seemed on such good terms with the sheriff. As if sensing her gaze, the man turned slightly. revealing a strong profile with a straight nose and firm jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. Florence quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. Later that afternoon, as Florence was rearranging the window display, the bell above the door announced a customer. She turned to find the stranger from the sheriff's office standing in her store, hat in hand, revealing dark hair that curled slightly where it had been pressed by the hat band. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice deep and pleasant. "Sheriff Patterson said Lawsons would have what I need." Florence straightened her apron. "Welcome to Lawson's General Goods. I'm Florence Lawson. How may I help you?" "Beau Ingram," he replied with a slight nod. "I'm in need of supplies. Been riding for days and running short on just about everything." "Of course, Mr. Ingram. What can I provide for you?" As Florence helped him gather provisions, she learned he was a rancher who owned land about 30 miles south of Dillon. He'd been away for several months helping his ailing uncle in Wyoming and had just returned. "Patterson tells me Clayton Lawson passed on," Beau said as she tallied his purchases. "I'm sorry for your loss. He was a fair man." "Thank you," Florence replied, surprised by his sincerity. "Did you know my father well enough? He extended credit to me when I was starting out and others wouldn't. Never forgot that." Beau's blue eyes met hers. "He spoke of you often, proud of your head for business." Florence felt an unexpected warmth at his words. "That's kind of you to say." "Not kind, just truth." He paid for his goods and collected the packages. "Miss Lawson, I'll be in town for a few days settling some business. Expect I'll be back for more supplies." After he left, Florence found herself standing at the window, watching him load his purchases onto his horse. There was something refreshingly straightforward about Beau Ingram that contrasted sharply with the veiled criticisms and condescending advice she'd endured these past months. The next morning, Florence was sweeping the boardwalk in front of her store when Walter Morganson approached, flanked by his usual companions. "Morning, Florence," he called, using the familiarity of her first name that she'd never granted him. "Fine day, isn't it?" "Good morning, Mr. Morganson," she replied evenly, continuing her sweeping. "Been thinking," he said, stepping closer. "This arrangement isn't sustainable. A woman alone, trying to compete with established businessmen. It's not proper and it's certainly not practical." Florence tightened her grip on the broom. "I appreciate your concern, but my business is doing quite well." Morganson laughed, a sound without humor. "Is it now? Word is you're behind on your property taxes. Barton mentioned you haven't made a payment on your father's loan in 2 months." Florence felt her face grow hot. The information was true, though it shouldn't have been common knowledge. Mr. Barton had apparently been discussing her financial situation. "My arrangements with the bank are private, Mr. Morganson." "Nothing's private in Dillon," he replied, stepping even closer. "I'm offering you a solution, Florence. Marry me. I'll incorporate your store into mine, settle your debts, and you'll have the protection of my name. It's more than generous considering." "Considering what?" Florence felt her temper rising. "Considering your damaged goods," he said bluntly. "Everyone knows your father refused proper suitors for you, keeping you tied to this store until you're practically on the shelf. 22 with no prospects. Time isn't on your side." Florence felt as if she'd been slapped. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. "Seems to me a lady sweeping her own walk deserves respect, not insults." Beau Ingram stood a few feet away, his stance casual but his eyes hard as they fixed on Morganson. Walter turned, irritation crossing his features. "This is a private conversation, stranger." "Not so private you needed to have it on the main street," Beau observed, stepping closer. "And not so private your voice didn't carry to half the town." Florence felt mortified yet grateful for the interruption. "Mr. Ingram, good morning. Did you need something from the store?" "Just came to order some specialty items," he said, his eyes not leaving Morganson. "Though I'm wondering if Mr. Morganson," Walter supplied stiffly. "Walter Morganson. I own the proper general store in Dillon." Beau's eyebrow lifted slightly at the emphasis. "I'm wondering if Mr. Morganson was just leaving." The tension stretched between the two men until Walter finally adjusted his waistcoat with a huff. "We'll continue this discussion later, Florence. Consider my offer carefully." He nodded curtly to his friends and they moved on down the boardwalk. When they were out of earshot, Florence exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram, that was uncomfortable." "Man has no right speaking to any woman that way," Beau said, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Especially not one running a business as fine as this." Florence gestured toward the store entrance. "You mentioned specialty items." Inside, as she wrote down his order for leather working tools and specific sizes of nails, Florence felt Beau studying her. "How long has Morganson been pressuring you?" he asked finally. Florence paused, pencil hovering over her order pad. "Since about 2 weeks after my father's funeral." He started with sympathy, then business advice, then thinly veiled threats about how difficult life would be for me alone. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Now he's moved to outright propositions disguised as generosity." Beau nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Your father mentioned Morganson's interest in acquiring this place, said he'd never sell to a man who waters down his flour and charges full price." Florence couldn't help her surprised laugh. "Father never said that to me. Clayton protected you where he could, I expect." Beau's expression grew serious. "Miss Lawson, I don't mean to pry, but are you truly in financial difficulty if Morganson knows about your dealings with the bank?" "The difficulties are temporary," Florence said firmly. "Spring shipments cost more than anticipated and I had to settle Father's medical bills. But summer brings the cattle drivers and miners through town. Business will improve." Beau nodded. "I've no doubt. Your father built a solid reputation." He hesitated. "Miss Lawson, Florence, if I may, I'd be happy to settle any outstanding accounts as an advance against future supplies for my ranch. No strings attached." Florence felt a rush of emotions: gratitude, pride, and unexpected warmth at his offer. "That's extremely generous, Mr. Ingram, but I couldn't accept. I'm determined to manage on my own terms." "As you should be," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "The offer stands regardless." Over the next few days, Beau Ingram became a regular visitor to Lawson's General Goods. Sometimes he purchased items, other times he simply stopped to talk. Florence learned he'd fought briefly for the Union in the final months of the war when he was barely 18, then worked cattle drives across Texas, before settling in Montana Territory 10 years ago. "What brought you here specifically?" she asked one afternoon as they shared coffee in the quiet store. "Wanted land of my own, somewhere with good water and grass," Beau replied. "Found a place where a creek runs year-round with mountains sheltering the northern edge. Previous owner lost his sons in the war and couldn't manage anymore." "You've built it up yourself?" "Mostly," he nodded. "Hired hands for the heavy seasons. It's modest compared to some spreads, but it's good land. 2,000 acres, about 500 head of cattle now." Florence was impressed. She'd heard enough ranching talk in her store to know that was a respectable operation. "And you manage it alone, no family?" A shadow crossed his face. "My wife died 6 years ago. Fever took her and our infant son." "I'm so sorry," Florence said softly, feeling an ache for his loss. "Thank you." His eyes met hers. "Buried myself in work after, built the ranch up, tried not to look back too much. Your father was one of the few people who didn't treat me like I might break when I came to town. Just talked business, whether regular things a man needs." Florence smiled, recognizing her father's practical kindness. He was good at that, seeing what people needed, not just what they wanted to buy. As the days passed, Florence found herself looking forward to Beau's visits. There was a steadiness to him that she found comforting. He never mentioned her situation unless she brought it up first, never offered unsolicited advice about the store, and never treated her as anything less than competent. In turn, she enjoyed their conversations about books. He was surprisingly well-read for a rancher, politics. They disagreed amicably about territorial governance and the future of Dillon. They both believed the railroad would bring prosperity if managed properly. On Friday afternoon, as Florence was preparing the order for the Bartons' spring social, the bell rang and Sheriff Patterson entered, looking uncomfortable. "Afternoon, Florence," he said, turning his hat in his hands. "Got something unpleasant to discuss." Florence felt a chill. "What is it, Sheriff?" Walter Morganson, has filed a complaint, says you've been selling goods below cost to drive him out of business. It's a serious accusation, could be considered unfair trade practices." "That's absurd," Florence exclaimed. "If anything, it's the opposite. He undercuts my prices on staples to draw customers, then overcharges on everything else." Patterson sighed. "I know it sounds fishy, but he's got documentation showing your prices against his costs. Says there's no way you could be making profit at your rates unless you're using inferior goods." "My father built this business on quality and fair pricing," Florence said, anger building. "Mr. Morganson is simply trying to force me out because I won't sell to him or marry him." "That may be," Patterson acknowledged, "but he's got the town council concerned. They're meeting tomorrow morning to discuss it. You should be there to defend yourself." After the sheriff left, Florence sat at the counter, trying to steady her shaking hands. This was a calculated move by Morganson. The council meeting would conflict directly with her delivery to the Bartons, which she couldn't delegate since she had no employees. Missing the delivery would damage her reputation. Missing the council meeting could damage her business permanently. The bell rang again, and Florence looked up to see Beau entering. One look at her face and his expression changed from greeting to concern. "What's happened?" he asked, crossing to the counter. Florence explained the situation, her voice growing steadier as she organized her thoughts. "It's a trap designed to force me to choose between two impossible options." Beau's jaw tightened. "Morganson's playing dirty. He knows I can't be in two places at once," Florence said. "If I miss the Barton delivery, I'll lose their business and standing in the community. If I miss the council meeting, I look guilty of his accusations." "What if you weren't alone?" Beau asked after a moment. "I could handle the delivery while you attend the council meeting." Florence looked at him in surprise. "You do that, of course," he said simply. "Just tell me what needs to be done." For the first time since her father died, Florence felt the weight on her shoulders lighten slightly. "Thank you, Beau. I don't know how to repay. No repayment needed," he interrupted gently. "That's what neighbors do." The next morning, Florence dressed in her finest outfit, a navy blue skirt and jacket that had been her mother's, updated by her own hand. She carefully pinned her honey brown hair into a neat chignon and added her mother's cameo brooch at her throat. Beau arrived early, looking unusually formal in a clean shirt and vest. "You look ready for battle," he observed with a smile. "I feel like I'm heading to one," she admitted, showing him the detailed list for the Barton delivery. "Everything's packed and labeled. The tablecloths need special care. Mrs. Barton will inspect the folding. I'll treat them like newborn lambs," Beau promised. "You focus on the council. Morganson won't know what hit him." The town council met in the small chamber adjacent to the courthouse. When Florence entered, she immediately noticed the seating arrangement: Morganson and his supporters on one side, with the 5 council members at a table facing the room. Sheriff Patterson stood near the back wall, his expression neutral. Mayor Holbrook, a portly man who owned the town's only bank, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address concerns raised by Mr. Walter Morganson regarding the business practices of Lawson's General Goods, now operated by Miss Florence Lawson following her father's passing." Florence sat straight-backed in her chair as Morganson presented his case, complete with a written comparison of prices that made her look either foolish or dishonest. "No business can sustain selling goods at these rates," he concluded, looking triumphantly at the council. "Either Miss Lawson is selling inferior merchandise while claiming quality, or she's deliberately pricing below cost to harm my established business. Both are unacceptable practices that damage our commercial integrity." When Florence's turn came, she approached the table calmly. "Gentlemen, Mr. Morganson's accusations are based on false premises. First, he's comparing his purchasing costs to my selling prices, not accounting for the fact that Lawson's has established relationships with suppliers that provide preferential rates." She opened her ledger. "I've brought our purchasing records for the past year. You'll note that my father secured agreements with wholesalers in St. Louis and Chicago that require larger initial orders but at significantly reduced prices. We accept smaller margins on some goods to ensure volume sales. As the council members examined her documentation, Florence continued, "Furthermore, Mr. Morganson's assertion that we're using inferior goods is demonstrably false. Our flour comes from the same mill as his. Our fabric is imported from the same Eastern manufacturers. The difference is that Lawson's doesn't artificially inflate prices on necessities like salt, sugar, and coffee items people must have regardless of cost." For the next hour, Florence systematically dismantled Morganson's claims, drawing on her intimate knowledge of the business her father had taught her to run. When questioned directly by council members, she responded with specific facts and figures rather than emotional appeals. "Miss Lawson," Mayor Holbrook said finally, "your father clearly taught you well. These records appear to be in order. However, Mr. Morganson raises a valid concern about the sustainability of your operation. A business requires consistent management, and without meaning to sound indelicate, a young woman alone faces certain challenges." Florence felt her careful composure slipping. "With respect, Mayor, the only challenges I've faced have been the constant questioning of my capabilities based solely on my gender, and the persistent attempts by certain parties to pressure me into relinquishing my property." Walter Morganson stood abruptly. "This is exactly the kind of emotional female response that proves my point. Business requires rational thinking and steady leadership. The Lawson store was successful under Clayton's management, but it will inevitably fail under his daughter's. I'm simply trying to prevent that outcome by offering a reasonable solution." "And what solution might that be?" came a voice from the doorway. Florence turned to see Beau standing there, his presence filling the small room. He moved to stand beside her chair. "This is a closed council meeting," Mayor Holbrook protested. "I've completed my delivery to the Barton residence," Beau said, nodding respectfully to the mayor but keeping his eyes on Morganson. "Mrs. Barton asked me to convey her complete satisfaction with the goods and service provided by Lawson's, as managed by Miss Florence." Morganson's face reddened. "This is irregular. Who are you to interrupt town business?" "Beau Ingram. I own the Diamond B Ranch south of here." He looked at the council members. "Gentlemen, I've been trading with Lawson's for years. Clayton ran an honest business and his daughter continues that tradition. I've reviewed the books myself as a potential investor they're sound." Florence looked up at him in surprise. They had never discussed investment. "The question before this council," Beau continued, "seems to be whether a woman can successfully manage a business alone. I submit that Miss Lawson has already proven she can. But if your concern is truly about stability rather than gender, perhaps I can address that." He placed a hand lightly on Florence's shoulder. "They mocked her for having no husband. The cowboy stood beside her and said she has one now." A shocked silence fell over the room. Florence felt her heart hammering in her chest as Beau continued, his voice steady. "Florence Lawson has agreed to become my wife. Any concerns about the stability of Lawson's general goods should be put to rest, as it will have the full financial backing of the Diamond B Ranch." Florence stood, finding her voice despite her shock. "Mr. Ingram and I have indeed reached an understanding," she managed, meeting his eyes briefly. "However, I will continue to manage the store as I have been, making all business decisions independently as my father intended." Mayor Holbrook looked between them, clearly flustered by this turn of events. "Well, this changes the context considerably." "It changes nothing," Morganson sputtered. "This is clearly a hasty arrangement to circumvent proper business practices." "On the contrary," Beau replied evenly, "it simplifies things greatly. Any further complaints about Lawson's business practices can be directed to me as well as to Miss Florence. I'm sure we can address them without requiring council intervention." The meeting adjourned shortly after, with the council finding insufficient evidence to support Morganson's claims. As Florence and Beau walked back toward the store in silence, she finally found the courage to speak. "That was quite a declaration, Mr. Ingram." Beau stopped walking, turning to face her. "It was, and I apologize for not discussing it with you first. It seemed the quickest way to end Morganson's maneuvering, but I've put you in an awkward position." Florence studied his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his expression. "You announced our engagement to the entire town council without actually proposing to me," she said, a smile tugging at her lips despite her confusion. Beau removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Not my finest moment," he admitted. "Truth is, Florence, I've come to admire you greatly these past days. Your determination, your intelligence, your kindness. I'd be honored if you'd consider my proposal for real, though I understand it's sudden." "It is sudden," Florence agreed, her heart racing. "We barely know each other." "True enough," he nodded. "So how about this? Let me court you properly. We'll tell people we're taking time to plan, get to know each other better. If you decide I'm not what you want, we'll say we reconsidered. No harm done, except maybe to my pride. And if Morganson continues his campaign against me in the meantime," Beau's expression hardened slightly, "then he'll be dealing with both of us, engagement or not. I protect my friends, Florence." Something in the way he said it made her believe him completely. "I accept your proposal to court me, Mr. Ingram," she said formally, then smiled. "Beau," he smiled back, the expression transforming his face. "Miss Lawson, Florence, you've made me a happy man." Over the weeks that followed, Dillon buzzed with gossip about Florence Lawson's unexpected engagement to the quietly prosperous rancher from the Diamond B. Some whispered it was a business arrangement, others that Beau Ingram had been sweet on Florence for years and had finally made his move after her father's passing. The more romantically inclined insisted it was love at first sight when he'd returned to town. Florence let them talk. The truth was developing somewhere in between as she and Beau embarked on a proper courtship. 3 evenings a week, he would come to town after she closed the store, and they would share dinner either in her apartment above the shop or at the hotel restaurant. On Sundays, when the store was closed, he took her to his ranch to show her the life he'd built. The Diamond B was more impressive than Beau had described. The main house was modest but solidly built of local timber, with a wide porch and glass windows a luxury in the territory. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, and his small crew of ranch hands were respectful and clearly loyal. "You've created something wonderful here," Florence told him as they sat on the porch one Sunday afternoon, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. "It's been lonely work sometimes," Beau admitted, his hand covering hers on the armrest between them. "Worth it, but lonely." Florence understood that feeling all too well. The store is the same way, surrounded by people all day, but still alone when the door closes. As spring turned to summer, Florence found herself looking forward to Beau's visits with increasing anticipation. She enjoyed his dry humor, his thoughtfulness, and the way he listened to her ideas about expanding the store's offerings. He never spoke down to her or suggested she couldn't manage on her own, yet he offered support whenever she asked for it. By midsummer, Walter Morganson had largely retreated from his campaign against her. The public support of Beau Ingram, respected in the community for his honest dealings and successful ranch, had effectively neutralized the worst of the gossip about Florence's capabilities. On a warm August evening, as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town, Beau stopped beneath a cottonwood tree and turned to face her. "Florence, there's something I need to ask you," he said, suddenly serious. "Yes," she replied, her heart quickening. "We've been courting now for nearly 3 months. In that time, I've come to care for you deeply." He took her hands in his. "I know we started this as a way to silence gossip and protect your business, but my feelings are real. I'm asking properly this time, will you marry me? Not for show, not for the town, but because I love you and want to build a life with you." Florence felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Oh, Beau, I've been falling in love with you too, day by day. Yes, I'll marry you for all the right reasons this time." Their wedding in September was the social event of the season in Dillon. Even Mrs. Barton seemed to have revised her opinion of Florence, especially after Beau announced they would be expanding Lawson's general goods to include a second location at the crossroads near his ranch, catering to the outlying homesteads and ranches. After the ceremony, as guests mingled at the reception held in the town hall, Walter Morganson approached the newlyweds with a tightness around his mouth that suggested his congratulations were more obligation than sincerity. "Quite a fortunate match for you, Florence," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Lawsons will benefit from a man's guidance at last." Before Florence could respond, Beau spoke, his arm firm around her waist. "On the contrary, Walter, I'm the fortunate one. Florence will continue managing the store exactly as she has been successfully. I'm smart enough to recognize business talent when I see it, even if others aren't." Morganson's face flushed dark red. "Well, I wish you both happiness," he managed before walking away stiffly. "That was diplomatic," Florence murmured, leaning into her husband's side. Beau chuckled. "Barely, but I meant every word." Later that evening, as they prepared to leave for their honeymoon trip to Denver, Florence found herself momentarily overwhelmed by the changes in her life. Just 6 months ago, she'd been alone, struggling to maintain her father's business against mounting opposition. Now she stood beside a man who respected her mind, valued her independence, and loved her heart, having second thoughts. Beau asked gently, noticing her quietness as their luggage was loaded into the wagon. Florence shook her head, smiling up at him. "Not at all. I'm thinking about how differently things might have gone if you hadn't happened to return to Dillon when you did." "I don't believe in accidents, Florence," he said, drawing her close. "I believe your father knew exactly what he was doing when he insisted you learn the business instead of finding you a husband. He was waiting for the right man, someone who would see your worth instead of trying to diminish it." "And are you that man, Beau Ingram?" she teased, though her eyes were serious. "I aim to be," he replied, kissing her softly. "Every day for the rest of our lives." 2 years later, Florence stood on the porch of their home at the Diamond B, watching Beau teach their 8-month-old son Clayton to pat the nose of a gentle mare. The sound of their laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the everyday noises of ranch life, the lowing of cattle, the hammering from the new storage barn being constructed, the distant calls of cowboys bringing in a herd. Lawson's General Goods now had 3 locations: the original store in Dillon that Florence still managed 3 days a week, the Crossroads store that served the outlying ranches, and a new establishment in the growing railroad town 20 miles east. They'd hired managers for the latter too, including Walter Morganson's nephew, who had proven himself far more progressive than his uncle. As Beau carried their son back toward the house, his face lit with joy, Florence reflected on the journey that had brought them together. From the painful days after her father's death through the humiliation of public doubt and criticism, to finding unexpected love with a man who saw her strength as an asset rather than a liability. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" Beau asked as he climbed the porch steps, settling their sleepy son in her arms. "I was thinking about that day in the council meeting," Florence replied, leaning into his embrace. "When you declared I had a husband now." Beau chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her back. "Not my smoothest moment. It was perfect," she countered. "It was exactly what I needed, someone willing to stand beside me, not in front of me." "Best impulsive decision I ever made," he said, kissing her temple, "though I think young Clayton here might be the best result of it." Florence turned in his arms, their son cradled between them. "I love you, Beau Ingram. Thank you for believing in me when even I was starting to doubt." "I love you too, Florence Ingram," he replied, his blue eyes warm with affection. "And I'll never stop believing in you or reminding anyone who needs to hear it that you're the strongest, smartest person I know. Husband or no husband." As the Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors behind them, Florence knew she had found not just security or protection, but a true partnership, one built on respect, admiration, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings.